Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's weekly energy boost. My name is Elisheva, and I am here this beautiful Monday morning with David, and we are talking today about cleansing the plagues of 2022.
What a name.
What a title. If you
First, I'm like, Elisheva, what? Where did this title come from?
Well, maybe we'll get to that in today's episode. The Weekly Energy Boost is a 7-day spiritual weather forecast. David and I, and sometimes our guests, aim to provide the most powerful and practical tools to help our listeners get through the coming week. Obviously, those lessons, those tools, that wisdom ends up being useful for situations year-round. But this week we're focusing on a really interesting meeting of energies, meeting of influences that have caused this interesting title to emerge. We are in the final days of the 12 days of Aries, which means that our energy is still heavily influencing the coming year. It's that unique Kabbalistic approach to planting seeds and constantly having the ability to impact the future in basically every single moment. And then we also have this coming week contains the Kabbalistic and often, misunderstood Jewish holiday of Passover, of Pesach. And that gives us also the opportunity to cleanse a tremendous amount of garbage, let's call it, darkness, from our lives. And what's interesting, at least to me, I reflect on this probably every year, is that, what we learn about energy, or let's do it backwards, what we learn about the calendar and time, and why this every week we come together to do this podcast, and why it's such a focus for us, is that according to Kabbalah, the calendar is not, the Kabbalistic calendar doesn't measure the passage of time. It measures the expression of energy. And so what we learn from looking at the Kabbalistic calendar is that...
It's powerful what you just said.
Should I say it again?
Yeah, I said it.
The Gregorian calendar measures the passage of time. The Kabbalistic calendar measures the expression of energy. So that's how we know that this week, everybody who's listening and everybody who's not listening is going to experience an onslaught of awareness of things, behaviors, habits, tendencies that don't serve them. Not because we need to look at it and say, gosh, I'm a terrible person, or why don't I learn, or I thought I was done with this, or I'm so embarrassed that this is my thing. Rather, it comes to us, to our awareness, so that we can release it. What the Kabbalists teach is that the same cosmic window, the same window in time that allowed the Israelites to leave Egypt 3,500 years ago, we have that same window in time this week. So we can leave our own Egypt. We can be freed of that, whatever chains bind us. And if you know the story, and if you haven't, you can watch Prince of Egypt or Exodus or the Ten Commandments. There's so many movies out there. What's interesting is that in this particular period, right, the weeks and months preceding leaving Egypt, there were 10 plagues. And granted, most of those plagues don't exist anymore. I mean, I can say that if you have school-aged children, you're familiar with the plague of lice. But the rest of those plagues pretty much don't exist. Every so often you hear that in a country far away, there was like a wave of locusts or, things like that. But our plagues are different. The things that challenge us, the things that we can use as excuses for why we can't flourish, why we can't move forward, why we can't grow and blossom into the souls that we are meant to be. We often look at what's going on around us as, well, I can't help it, I can't do that, or the government or my neighbors, or what are people going to think of me? And in a way, those are the plagues that we face today. So we want to talk a little bit about not letting things get in our way, what's plaguing us in modern times, and how to move forward.
You talked about the expression of energy in terms of the Kabbalistic calendar. And a lot of times people ask the question, well, the energy of this week, for example, that does help a person let go of something that is holding them back. This is the time where those toxic, mediocre relationships start to fizzle. And if you've been focusing on removing something from your life that's been holding you back, the universe supports you in this time to be able to do so. Now, that being said, is that what every single person in the world is going through? The answer is obviously no, but you listening feel like you're going through it, right? So the Zohar talks, the Zohar, the main Kabbalistic text that has all this ancient wisdom from 2,000 years ago, talks about how there are two energies that affect a person according to what's called the supervision of the Creator. So there's something called the general and the specific. So when a person has a desire to change and transform and get closer to the light of the Creator, it says that the universal forces focus specifically on them, and all the forces of this world will help you achieve that. And then you become more in line with the calendar of energy. So someone who desires to grow and change and be closer to the Creator will feel right on cue around this time the cleansing of negativity and that support from the universe. However, someone who is not conscious of transformation, does not desire it, does not have the intent to grow and cleanse their negativity, they are part of what's called the general, which means that instead of a direct influence on them and pushing them to grow, they're more going to be affected by the general population of what other people's energy is, which is an interesting concept. To simplify what I just said, if you have a desire to be with the light, no one else's energy will affect you, and the universe will support you to grow, either painfully or through mercy. But the point is, you're going to get that support. If you do not have any consciousness of wanting to grow, like if you're listening, you probably do, but if you know people who have no consciousness of wanting to grow or desire to grow, then they are going to be more affected by the public energy, which means that their destiny can get wrapped up in other people's destiny. If someone else is meant to go through chaos and they're in the vicinity of this person, they can get swept up in that. That's the general. It's a very deep concept. As you were talking, it came to me and I wanted to share that because I wanted you to know, the audience, that if you have a desire to change, the universe is sending angelic forces specifically to help you change. And no one can stop that from happening.
You know what's so interesting about our time, thinking about, let's say we have the external or the energetic commonality, let's say right now, whatever's happened for the last 5,783 years in this week energetically, we share that with not only everybody on the planet right now, but also everybody who's ever lived. So what's interesting about our time, what you were saying about being influenced by external forces is that I think about our ancestors, let's say even 100 years ago or 50 years ago, let's not even go so far as 100 years ago. They didn't, if there was a war in the Ukraine and Russia, how would they know about it? Meaning, of course, they might know about it, but we're so we're overexposed to what's going on in the world, I think, right? That's my opinion. We're overexposed to it, so you may hear stories about, like I'm saying, 50 years ago, they may have known that there was a war. Would they have seen that image of that child and the rubble? Maybe a month after it was taken when it appeared in a newspaper kind of thing. But we're so aware and present in real time to what's going on around the world, it's very hard not to be affected. And I think one of the challenges with trying to be a force for good, trying to be positive, trying to grow and to change is that it's very easy to look outside and say, why bother? Everybody else is acting like selfish, arrogant, in it for themselves. Why do I have to take the high road? Why do I have to be the elevated person? Why I'm always concentrating on giving and doing good, and everybody's just trying to take advantage of everybody else. Why bother?
Well, that leads us to what we need people to focus on, what we all should be focusing on this week. And it was inspired by something you said to me in the car right when you picked me up, which was any decision that you make reactively, or if you react to a situation meaning you try to do something from a place of pain or lack or fear, whatever you build will eventually fall apart and waste your time. And even if it seems like it's moving you forward, it's an illusion, and then it's going to fall apart.
What's an example of that?
What's an example of that? Well, think about people's day-to-day decisions in trying to educate someone, in trying to change someone to be a different type of person, and you manipulate them, you control them, you force them to be different. And maybe they are different because you did that. That's an illusion. That the whole construct that you created is going to fall apart, and you're actually going to have to spend a lot of time, energy, therapy, explaining to undo all that you did, even though it looked like it worked. So anything that comes from a place, it could be building, it could be building a business, it could be building a friendship, it could be pursuing a certain relationship. If it comes from lack, pain, fear, and you're reacting to something, meaning you're not in control, the light's not in control, it will eventually be undone, is the point. And what the energy of this week does is it expedites the undoing of reactive energy. When we say leaving Egypt means the construct, something that's been built upon reactive energy, an addiction, a relationship, a belief system. Anything that we've created that's been birthed from a place of fear will be undone in the time before Passover and also in the 49 days after Passover. This is a time where people can experience confusion also because of the undoing. And the advice of the Kabbalist during the confusion is allow the process to happen. Allow the undoing to happen. Don't fight it. Go through the pain. Go through the pain. I was talking to somebody recently that had this come to Jesus moment, if I use the expression, come to Jesus moment with the way he works. And he's messaging that it was so painful. And what's the advice to handle this pain? Especially if it's happening now. You sit in it. You go through it. You don't numb it. Allow the undoing. It sounds like a movie. Sounds like a horror film.
The Undoing.
The Undoing.
With David Guillaume.
the Undoing.
What's going to fall apart next?
It's good when things fall apart.
There is a book called Things Fall Apart.
And we want people to have solace. We want to take solace in knowing that if something's falling apart, especially now,
it's a good thing.
It's a great thing. It's kind of like I saw this ugly house on this beautiful piece of land just the other day. I was walking, and I'm like, what a beautiful piece of land. And what an ugly house. And
the next day they started to demolish
it. What I was going to say. I was going to say, whoever buys this house, I know you couldn't even remodel it. It was so ugly. And sometimes the best way just to destroy, just start over, even if the taxes go up because you took down all the walls.
Okay, well, you bring up a really good point. Thank you for that lead in. No, seriously, if you look at what's plaguing the average person in 2022, taxes may be one of those things, inflation, war, the opioid crisis. There isn't a shortage of excuses to look and just be, I don't know, bowled over, flabbergasted. What's the word? Like, how can this be, with all of the progress in technology, in science, in medicine, in even psychology and empathy and like there's so much progress, and yet we still seem to be acting like cavemen. If I look out there, or maybe I'm not a good example, but everybody who's listening right now, every so often you look at what's going on in the world and you say, what the heck? What's the right response? How can we respond? It's not me, right? I'm not fighting in the war. I'm not, working in the Fed. I'm not going to up this number or lower that. It's not in my actual control to be involved in those things. I can't literally affect them. I don't even know who to call to give my input to. What am I supposed to do? How can I affect? What's my role in influencing what's going on in the world?
It's very important not to get sucked into what you see and what you hear and what you feel, because that has never changed since the beginning of time. What's happening in the world is the perfect chemistry to elicit a reaction that we need to deal with inside ourselves.
Every individual.
And so people say, well, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And that's the perfect theatrical display to bring out your fear. So it doesn't matter it doesn't matter if it's in 100 years or 100 years ago. What happens in every generation is the perfect theatrical display to just enough bring out that which I need to change, and not so intensely where it depresses me, and not so blandly where I don't take notice. So it's got to hit you right where it hurts. And that goes from the micro level to the people in your family, the way they talk to you and treat you, and the challenges they go through. Your family will present to you situations that will perfectly make you scared and upset. But that's exactly by design. And whether that's, again, in 500 years or 500 years ago, everyone's family was perfectly scripted to do that to them, right? Not too much, not too little. So that's what's happening in the world. It doesn't really matter what it is.
It's always going to be that.
It's always going to make you upset, is the point. And even if the world was cured of every problem, something would need to exist to push you forward and to awaken that which is weak inside of us. So it's not about like, I want to make the world perfect so that I can be relaxed. Well, that's the problem. When we're relaxed, we're not perfecting ourselves. So the world's going to do its thing. Leave it alone. Just let it do its thing.
Well, but that's something that I feel is a message or a conversation I have constantly with the individuals that I work with. And I'm sure this is something that's happened to you as well. Even when they say, I'm worried that my kids won't be okay, let's say when they grow up, or I'm worried that the business won't last, or I'm worried that it could even be about the economy, or maybe they're buying a house, whatever. They're worried about some future moment working out. And I think that's, you could look at the state of the world and say the same thing. When is the war going to end? By the way, people are listening to this, the war might already be over. That's the funny thing about these conversations. But, or let's say a year or two ago, we were talking about COVID, right? It's the same thing. COVID, you could easily look at, I had this conversation actually with my kids this week, because the biblical story that's taking place now, I mean, not the leaving Egypt, but the weekly portions, it does talk about plagues and being in seclusion, right? Isolating and things like that. So we were talking about diseases like leprosy that have basically table talk at the Ballas family household. Leprosy. So we were talking about how there is scientific merit to secluding and not infecting other people and things like that. And how whatever, right, it does sometimes seem when you look, let's say, my point was 2 years ago, when you looked at what was going on, it really looked like there was nothing you could do to affect it except stay home. To David's point, whatever process we all individually went through personally, while we were staying home, was exactly what we needed to go through. And you see that people are not the same, right? There's all these different trends and things. I don't think that the world will not go back to being the same. But my point is that it's not about how is it going to work out or what's going to be when, or even planning for the future. Just what came to mind was I know somebody who was saving cash in a can underground in her backyard for a rainy day.
And then the rain came and destroyed
No. But
I'm like, that's where the story is going. Rain came, seeped into the can, and the irony is not lost upon her.
No. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there that are saving for a rainy day, and I'm not saying anything bad about saving.
Put it in a waterproof can, yes.
There you go. That's the lesson. No, the point is, if you really are worried about what's going to be, the question is not what is going to be. The question is, what can you do now? Not in terms of controlling or manipulating the future. And I think that with the kids, it's a good example because you really can't know what your kids are going to turn out like. You can give them everything, all the best in the world, and maybe that's not the right way to say it. You can think that I have a child who's now a grown adult who I thought was going to be an engineer. Okay? Lego fanatic. Okay? So building everything, interested in no, not even close. Okay? So, and that was not something I was pushing them towards. That was just a talent, a gift, an interest that I thought was going to cultivate and develop. And my point is, you cannot know what's going to be in 5 years. If that's the lesson of this decade, you cannot know what's going to be in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. What you do have control of is what you do with this very moment. And what you do with this very moment is actually what determines the moment after and the moment after and the moment after that. So that if you are worried, afraid, anxious, perplexed, confused about some future event or moment or transition, the only thing that is in your control to affect is this moment, and now this moment, and now this moment. And when you stay focused on what you can do in this moment, you are literally creating a series of positive moments that will build up and dramatically improve whatever it is that you're worried about happening. So it's like the only thing in your control is right now. Don't be busy trying to control next week or the week after or 12 years from now, because as much as you plan and prepare and save and everything else, the real control you have is what you're doing right now, and that's what transforms what will be then.
It is important not to give energy to what you think can, should, or will happen in the future. And it's important that you stay positive about the future, because ultimately what you believe will happen creates the vessel for that thing to happen. And the people who are positive, who have certainty about their future, they are always going to end up in the right place. And those who have doubts and fears and try to control and manipulate their future are always on that hamster wheel of anxiety. So it is important. That's why our teacher, the Rav, would always say that the smarter you are, the harder it will be for you to have a happy life. Because people who are smart plan for the future. People who are smart think and overthink and
calculate
they keep calculating and recalculating. I was just reading this article about this guy. I forgot his name, but he's like this 30-year-old kid who made like $20 bajillion, and he's big in the crypto space, and so he was getting interviewed. It's very powerful because you see that he's a genius, obviously, from MIT, and within his 20s he created something that just kind of like revolutionized the space. And they asked him if the initial thought of altruism in which he entered the space, he still thinks it's the right thing to do. So he kind of like sighed and he told the reporter, if I had to keep rethinking about everything I do, I would get nowhere. I'm going to stick with my original thought. I'm not going to think about it anymore, and I'm going to move forward. And it was so powerful because his message throughout the whole interview was, don't overthink it. The interviewer was like, he even let me look over his shoulder and look at his computers and his emails as we were doing the interview. And in most cases, people of his level would think that every single piece of information is like a trade secret that's top secret. And this guy was like, he didn't think. He just said, whatever. And it's just so powerful because at his level, he realized if he does think and overthink, he'll crash. Because that's overthinking. That's what it does. It brings you down, and then you can't elevate anymore.
If you've been listening to the Weekly Energy Boost for any period of time, you know that David often talks about the blessing of not knowing, of being in the state where you have no idea. And all that's left to do is surrender, basically. And to me, when I think of the word plague.
This is the headline that this is not my novel idea.
No. David didn't invent it. He just likes to reinforce it over and over again. But when I think of the word plague, not only as it relates to what happened in Egypt or in the movies, but even in the, when they were comparing back then the Spanish flu to COVID. And I had a period this year, not COVID related whatsoever, where my kids, I have 3 school-age kids at home, and they just rolled over illness after illness after illness. It was like lice was one of the issues. We had lice, we had the stomach flu, we had a cold that could have been COVID that I was testing them for COVID for, but it was a series of 3 weeks where everybody was home at least twice. And I was getting called to pick kids up back and forth. Like I couldn't even start a meeting without the phone ringing. And I had this moment, thanks to COVID, I'm familiar with working at home, so it's definitely less dramatic than it would have been, let's say, 5 years ago. But I had this moment where I was like, okay, I get it. I can't make plans. It's another reminder for me that I can't only go with the flow when it's necessary. I need to live in the flow. I need to live in the flow. Living in the flow means, yes, I may have a shopping list and I may have plans and I may have guests that I've invited over and some more people will show up out. Like there's this saying, right? Man plans and God laughs.
Mm-hmm.
I want to spiritualize that because that's a cynical statement. It's really our work. If we really want to be a positive force in this time where it is very easy to be bogged down by the negativity, not only the negativity out there, but the heightened awareness of the negativity within each one of us. As David was saying, that's the nature of this time. The nature of this time is that the dirt is going to float to the surface. And it's supposed to be that way because anything that isn't sustainable, anything that doesn't serve us will also float away with it. Right? Maybe last month, I think it was, we talked a lot about how many times in life we sustain things simply because we always have, or we're not really thinking about it. It's that idea carries through now, and we want to not hold on. If the universe is telling us to move on, why are we holding on? Let it go, and that surrender. While we think I don't want to say we think. I think most people perceive surrender as the hardest thing to do. Sometimes it is. But most of the time, we only think it's going to be difficult. And that's why I'm giving it a more positive spin and saying, don't just go with the flow when you need to. Don't go with the flow when your plans don't work out or things aren't going your way or somebody tells you no. Don't go with the flow then. Live in the flow. Because if you live in the flow, you never have to go with the flow. It's never going to be distressing or upsetting or disappointing because you're already going with the flow. And living in that state of surrender, of peacefulness, that doesn't mean you don't get shaken up because, as David mentioned, if what you see on the news shakes you up, it's meant to shake you up. The question is, what do you do once you're shook up? Do you tuck into a bag of potato chips and ice cream because you're so depressed and miserable that the world is going to hell in a handbasket? Or do you think, you know what, there are things that I know that I can do to turn on the light. I can share, I can check in with a friend, I can not allow the negative thoughts and the negative backtalk and the natural pessimism that is, I don't have to feed it. I don't have to give into it. And that to me is one of the most important lessons we can take into the coming week. That idea that my light is enough. And maybe that's part of the reason that there is so much darkness in this period, is that our light is so much brighter against the landscape right now. The positive things that we do, the shifts that we make, the growth we accomplish is so much more dramatic when things are dark. And we wouldn't recognize light if not for the darkness. The Kabbalists give the example of, if you held a candle up to the sun, would you be able to recognize that the candle was even lit? No. That's why we're in this physical reality where there is shadow in which to shine our light. So rather than being disheartened by the state of the world, by the plagues, by the cleansing that seems to be happening now, let's take this week and commit each and every one of us to being a light, to being a force for good, to being a candle, not in next to the sun, but really in these times where it seems so impossible to be the light, because even a matchstick in a darkened stadium is going to brighten up every single seat there. On that note, we want to thank everybody for listening. If you're on podcast right now, please pause, rate, and review. If you're on social media listening, like and share. We are reaching more and more people every week because of you, so continue to do that work. If you aren't already, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Weekly Energy Boost. And if you have any questions or anything you'd like to learn more about, we have a webpage at weeklyenergyboost.com where you can see all of the things that we think are exciting or important or interesting to offer our listeners. And we'll see you next week on the Weekly Energy Boost.